Welcome to another episode of TERF Talk Down Under. I am Stassja and this is Ange. Hi, Ange.
Hi, Stas. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. I think we did good on the weekend, Ange.
Yay. Yep, we did really good.
Yeah, we held a protest on Parliament steps in Melbourne City against the housing of males in women's prisons. We got about, I think it was roughly 30.
Yes, I think slightly over 30 because some came just for the protest and disappeared quite quickly. But yeah, and there was a lot of women that we didn't know that had requested to come. Because it was our first post-COVID protest action, we had to be very careful screening who we could allow to attend because of the threat of trans activists counter-protesting. And I think considering the amount of concern and fear that's out there after seeing what's happened overseas and what's actually happened to us in the past, it was a great turnout. And it was the beginning of more women having the courage to turn up and protest against these barbaric things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good, really good. It was great to see everybody in person.
Women came from far and wide for that. We had one woman come from a town up on the New South Wales border.
Yep. And before we had to change the date, we had a woman who was going to fly in from Sydney. So, women are really prepared to travel for this. Yeah.
But what was really good, hanging out afterwards, we all went to a pub and got some food and drinks, and just the range of women that were there. There was a woman whose partner is actually in a women's prison here in Victoria. I sat and chatted with two mums whose teenage girls are identifying as trans. I spoke with a school wellbeing officer who, when you've got 5 girls in one class identifying as non-binary, I mean, it's a problem. It's a social contagion, obviously. But then at the very end, when we were leaving, I noticed that there's a 70-year-old lesbian sitting having an in-depth chat with a young lesbian in her early 20s. And I was just like, this is great, I like, that's what, that's good for young lesbians to be exposed to the wisdom of older women, I think.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. Great turnout. Great to catch up with our mates. And the friendships that develop between women who share this interest, like you can make some really firm friends. It's so worth attending these events, and we have social functions as well, so it's not all activism, but we have more low-key activist activities too, like when the time we chalked the ABC and things like that. So if you're interested, get in touch with us. There will be a vetting process, obviously, because of the risk of nefarious interests, but yeah, I think it's great. But the protest was quite effective because we were on a public transport route, so we had trams going past constantly, and we got the finger a couple of times, laughed, gave it back. Had one heckler who was a very, very, very young woman who was easily dispatched. But yeah, the people on trams, they're like shocked to see us. And then we, because we saw the Harry Potter stuff on the theatre opposite, we went down there and posed for a photo to show support for TERF Queen JK. And as we were walking through the crowd, people going, there's the TERFs. And it was almost like they didn't believe that we existed in real life. It was really weird. It was like we were like, celebrities or something, because they're going, look, TERFs, look, there's TERFs. And everyone's turning and looking at us. It was really funny, but there wasn't any hostility to it. They were going, some of the young men were going, there's TERFs. But, it was like, it proved to me how important it was that we are seen to have a visible presence, because people don't know that we exist here in Australia. There's this Twitter war going on at the moment between that like Labor stooge PR guy who is a huge Daniel Andrews fan. And he said on Twitter, TERFs don't exist in Australia. So all the Australian TERFs have now piled onto his account going, excuse me, we're here, you know, and I shared a couple of photos from our protest. But the reason that, you know, the left has been so successful in keeping leftist women quiet is because they don't actually believe that there are women out there arguing, because the media and everyone else fails to platform us. So they think the only resistance to gender ideology is coming from Christians and right-wing women. But that's not true. The left have been leading this charge for years, and mostly lesbians. Lesbians have been leading this charge for years. So yeah, no, it's really great.
We definitely peaked a few people walking past. There was a couple, they looked maybe in about 50, and the woman was just completely shocked. She could not believe that male sex offenders are being housed in women's prisons. So, so that was really good. I wasn't paying attention, but I think there were a couple of other passerbys that stopped for a bit of a chat, and someone just sent me yesterday a business card for a woman who works for an Indigenous organisation here in Victoria. So I look forward to having a chat with her and seeing if we can get, you know, an Aboriginal organisation on board with what we're doing. That would be exciting.
Yeah, because it's Indigenous women that are, you know, mostly affected by this ideology in prisons, because as we know, they have a higher incarceration rate. And there's also stories Kat Katarina brought to our attention about, you know, LGBT missionaries going out into Aboriginal communities and convincing, you know, kids who end off being wards of the state that they're actually transgender. Now, if that's not like a particularly horrifying form of colonization, I don't know what is. And also they're just, you know, this bullshit about two-spirit and, you know, claiming that, you know, men's business and women's business were entwined throughout history. You know, that's erasing Aboriginal culture. So I'm sure that there are quite a few Aboriginal people who are deeply concerned about this ideology. But when they see that, you know, a lot of the public figureheads of some of their movements, like Lydia Thorpe and the Green senators, so trans women are women, they're afraid to speak out. You know, the only Aboriginal person I know that's spoken up on this is Jacinta Price. And you know, she's once again a Liberal Party member, but she's the only one. But privately, you know, I think there's a lot of people worried about the way that this gender creep has crept into their communities.
Absolutely. And, you know, come on, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones were not part of Indigenous culture.
Yep, and that's freaking frightening. Frightening that they're sterilising Aboriginal kids as well as autistic kids and gay kids at a higher rate than anyone else. So it is absolutely terrifying. The more you learn about this ideology, the more you realise how insidious and dark it is.
And hiding behind friggin' rainbows.
Yeah, hiding behind inclusivity and rainbows. It's just bullshit. And the fact that the left are leading this, you know, shit, even 10 years ago, they would see straight through it. But, you know, they've all been bought. They're not real leftists. They're all middle-class people who will never be impacted by this. They're all, you know, they're not working-class people. They're not people who are in any way disadvantaged. And they've sold this ideology onto everybody else. It's just despicable.
Also on Sunday, Sydney women held their first Peakers Corner.
Yeah.
Not speakers, Peakers Corner. They're on a mission to peak people. I saw a few clips. They're not public yet, but hopefully we'll be able to share them eventually. So well done, Sydney women. If you would like to attend Peakers Corner in Sydney, feel free to message us. We'll put you in contact with the right people. And coming up in Brisbane on Saturday, the 24th of September, 10 a.m, Redcliffe Place. The wonderful Anna McCormack is holding another No Self ID in Queensland rally. There will be merchandise available to buy, speakers, a footpath march, and a bit of a hangout over lunch afterwards. If so, get onto it. Queensland's in trouble. You know, they've only got one House of Parliament up there, and it is the Labor government have the majority, so you know it's really looking like self-ID is going through.
Yep.
But
Yep.
you know, it's still worth getting out there and making your opinion known.
I mean, I don't think the general public realizes, you know, the impact of self-ID. They still have this idea that you know, the trans woman is the post-operative transsexual who's convincingly female, and you know, most women, including some gender critical women, don't have you know, a real opposition to them being in, say, the women's toilet, a public toilet or something like that. Some very strongly reject that, but you know, people have got to get through their heads about the autogynephiles. They've got to get through their heads the average trans identified person who by their own admission is mentally ill.
Yeah.
You know, so they've got to get through their heads, you know, the kids that are being targeted by this ideology, you know, gay, autistic, whatever, you know, because they are the media has been so successful in stifling debate here in Australia and only showing one side of this, the general public has been duped. They don't even know what self-ID means. They haven't had an opportunity to understand what it means. That just goes through, and the only people that really pay attention to trans laws, blah blah blah, are people who are invested in trans ideology, like trans activists and people like us. The average person sees trans, and because it's every second article in the paper, just skip over it and think, oh, that's not relevant to me. I don't know any trans people, so they don't actually realize what's happening. And then one day they're out, you know, in a female-only space or a change room or something like that, and that's when the full impact of self-ID hits them. When they go to make a complaint and they get told that they can't make a complaint and there's nothing they can do about it, or to get the F out because that man has more rights than you.
Yep. We're still in the awareness raising phase, that's for sure.
For sure. We're so far behind the UK, but we're getting there.
Speaking about toilets, mentioned in there, this article has just come out today, Friday. North Lakes High School on the New South Wales Central Coast has put signs on the toilets. Boys' toilets, it now says he/they. Girls' toilets, she/they. Utterly ridiculous, just infuriating. And Mark Latham has had a lot to say about it, and he's completely right. But he said that an outraged father had contacted him because this father has a 13-year-old daughter at the school. And, you know, the implications of this is that 17 or 18-year-old boys could potentially be using the toilets alongside his daughter. And that's unsafe. If you don't see that as a safeguarding issue, you've got shit for brains.
Yep. I've got teenage kids, and you know, my son avoids using the men's and my daughter avoids using the girls because they're not safe as they are, let alone having the opposite sex in there.
Your video has frozen, but I can still hear you.
One of us is frozen.
There you go.
Is one of us frozen? Well,
we'll see what happens in the
Oh, it's mine. It's my internet. Probably just missed my rant.
No, I could still hear you. So, yeah. Anyway, WPATH have, can you hear me, Ange? Uh-oh. Ange, you're frozen. Anyway, I'll just keep talking. WPATH is holding a virtual online symposium. It starts today, I believe. And one of the speakers is going to be talking about eunuchs. Hey, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. My internet disappeared.
Did you hear what I was saying about WPATH?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
They've got a virtual online symposium starting today.
Ooh.
And one of the speakers is talking about eunuchs. So we know from Genevieve Gluck's work that WPATH is pushing to make eunuch a gender identity.
And they'll sell it to traumatized kids who've been, you know, experienced sexual assault, want to get rid of all their reminders of it. They'll sell nullo surgery to those children.
Well, there was the guy that was the detransitioner that was on 60 Minutes USA who had an orchiectomy, had his testicles removed at, I think he was about 19 when he had it done. And then, you know, a year later realizes, oh no, I'm just a gay man. And so now he's looking to get, you know, implants so that he's got the appearance of testicles. But that means he's going to be on testosterone injections for the rest of his life. It's just heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking.
It's sick.
And sick.
Yeah.
This was very interesting, this news. Greg Donnelly, he's a Labor MP in New South Wales. He's clearly on side gender critical, and in some committee, he's had a whole lot to say about the medical transitioning of children, the gender affirmation model, this particular gender clinic in New South Wales, I think it's in Newcastle, called Maple Leaf House. And he even mentioned the Tavistock clinic and the more cautious approach being taken by overseas countries. And he's put it to Brad Hazzard, who is the New South Wales Liberal Minister for Health. Brad Hazzard, like, it was just this complete reversal.
Yep.
I actually read through the Hansard transcript first, and I was like, what's going on here? I had to like triple check who was Liberal and who was Labor. I was like, what's going on here? We've got a Labor person on side. What? Anyway, he's hassled Brad Hazzard to, you know, do something about what's happening to children. And this Brad Hazzard is just like, oh, there's no problem here, pretty much. Or I'm not qualified to comment on that. That's up to clinicians. Like, just passing the buck. We see it over and over again on these issues. It's infuriating.
And did you see at the end of the article that was written by the ABC, they said at the bottom, stated as if it were fact, that puberty blockers are completely reversible.
Terrible.
It's a lie.
Really tired of this shit from the ABC.
Me too.
It's just infuriating, yeah.
It is. It doesn't make sense that they're reversible. If you think it through, it just does not make sense.
Look, I know from speaking with a detransitioner who he wasn't given puberty blockers, but he was given cross-sex hormones. And it's completely fucked up his endocrine system. So his body, even though he's gone off the estrogen, his body still isn't producing normal adult male levels of testosterone. So, you know, you cannot say that puberty blockers are reversible. It's a lie. We know it's a lie. It's been a bit quiet in gender critical news. I think the Queen's death has really overshadowed all other news for the last week. So
yeah, although the Mermaids versus LGB Alliance situation has dominated the UK news, and it has been a wonderful opportunity to show how absurd gender ideology is, because Mermaids' denial of basic facts is astonishing.
Yeah, right. Look, I haven't been following it closely, but tribunal tweet. What is it?
Yeah.
What do they call it?
Tribunal tweets.
Yeah.
Tribunal tweets. Yeah.
On Twitter have been.
It is. And the way the media is reporting on it too.
Yeah, I saw a really good one from the Daily Telegraph, where LGB Alliance had shown that, you know, there are a lot of LGB kids being transitioned. It's fact. It's a fact. It's there in the data.
Some of the little data coming out of gender clinics, that's the stuff we've had access to. They tend to keep their data, they either don't keep recordings of information or they're pretty guarded with it.
That's it. Well, we've got our guest has just joined us, and
Awesome.
he's actually done freedom of information requests to gender clinics here in Australia. So let's bring her in. We're very pleased to have joining us Dr. Dianna Kenny. She's a professor of psychology, and she works with children with gender dysphoria. And I believe her clinic is thriving. Welcome, Dianna. Good to see you.
Hi.
Hello. Hello.
Thanks for coming. Now, I was just mentioning that you put in a bunch of freedom of information requests to gender clinics here in Australia some years back. Can you tell us about that and what you found in that data?
Well, my colleague, Greg Donnelly, who is a member of the Legislative Assembly in the New South Wales Parliament, actually made the freedom of information requests because just mere mortals, couldn't breach the firewall and get information. So, we kind of put the weight of Parliament behind us, and it was a very arduous and slow process, but, we finally got some data. And so now I have data from 2014 to 2020, and we have a full set of data from 4 states, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and Western Australia. And we have partial data from South Australia, and unfortunately no data from Tasmania, which is a hotbed of, gender affirmation.
Yeah.
But because they don't have a clinic, there's no single source of data that you can access. Most of it is being done through private practitioners. And apparently, according to my sources, there are some children who are travelling to Victoria and New South Wales from Tasmania for treatment. So we don't have a handle on what's going on in Tasmania, and we don't really have a handle on what's happening in Northern Territory. So we don't have a full picture, because even in the states that have gender clinics, there are increasing numbers of GPs, paediatricians and paediatric endocrinologists who are providing puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to young people, and we've got no way of determining the numbers that are attending these private practitioners. We've started to develop a list of people that we know are doing that, and it's quite a long list already. There's over maybe 150, 160 people on the list, and that's only the ones we're aware of. The other place that we're not aware of is a relatively newcomer, and that's Maple Leaf House in Newcastle. So my data, sadly, is very incomplete. It doesn't give a full picture, but at least it gives us a picture of what's happening in the clinics, and it shows the trends over the time span for which I have data, which is now 8 years. So it is valuable, but it can't be used to say these are the number of children, who are being treated according to the so-called gender affirmation model.
Mm. And with the data that you did get back from the gender clinics, what's the increase in children presenting with gender dysphoria. What does that look like here in Australia? And is it comparable to, you know, the UK where they did have more clear data?
Yeah, it is comparable to the UK, and it's also comparable to New Zealand. I have a contact in New Zealand who is trying to compile numbers of young people presenting in New Zealand, and he seems to have a greater population data. You know, he seems to have been able to access more complete data than we have here in Australia. But the important thing is that the trends are very similar. So there has been an increasing number of young people continuing to present. The good news is that there appears to have been a decrease in the number of children actually being prescribed puberty blockers in the clinics.
Okay.
So even though the numbers of referrals have gone up and the number of young people being seen, there does seem to be a trend demonstrating a downward slope of the number of young people who are actually being prescribed puberty blockers, and not a change really in the number who are getting cross-sex hormones. But we have to remember that the young people getting cross-sex hormones in the New South Wales Gender Clinic are referred to private practitioners. So that gender clinic doesn't offer cross-sex hormones. And so that's why their numbers look so low. They just refer them out to private treatment after they turn a certain age or after they believe they're ready for cross-sex hormones. But in the clinics offering cross-sex hormones, the numbers seem to be stable. There doesn't seem to be the sharp increase following the sharp increase in referrals. So I believe some of our advocacy and events overseas has made these clinics somewhat more cautious. Nowhere near cautious enough, because far too many children are still being placed on these, you know, life-changing medications. But I dare to hope that there's been a slowing of those prescriptions.
Really interesting. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, here in Victoria, 15-year-olds receive double mastectomies through the Royal Children's Hospital, but they actually get sent to Sydney for the surgery because it's illegal to do it here in Victoria, but they remain patients of the Victorian clinic. And so Dr. Telfer was on television saying, oh, no, we don't perform surgery on minors here in Melbourne, which, well, they don't perform the surgery in Melbourne, but their patients are referred to have the surgery.
Have you heard of that happening, Dianna, in Australia?
What concerns me is that, you know, doing a double mastectomy on a 15-year-old is the gravest form of medical negligence and abuse. Mm-hmm. Actually, it's malpractice. And, you know, a woman called Joanna Kennedy flippantly stated that if a young woman had her breasts removed surgically and she decided at some later time that she wished she hadn't done that, she can always go and get some implants.
Oh, that's outrageous.
That's on the public record of her saying that. And we have, you know, statements from a transgender surgeon whose name just escapes me at the moment.
Gallagher.
Oh, no, I've just had a mental blank. Anyway, she's performed 2,000 so-called gender-affirming surgeries, and she has stated on the record that a child who goes on puberty blockers before they reach puberty or, you know, pass through puberty, have absolutely zero chance of any sexual function as an adult.
Yep.
And yet, yeah.
Marcy Bowers?
Yes, thank you. Yes, Marcy Bowers, yeah. So one surgeon has done 2,000 surgeries, and there's so many of them out there, you know, jumping on the bandwagon. And you don't hear about the horrific complications of this surgery. You know, these young people are taking 12 to 14 weeks to just recover from the onslaught, you know, of this, you know, brutalization of their bodies. And then they have all these long-term complications. You know, they don't have a firm urine stream. They get urinary tract infections. They get fissures. They get infections. They've got pain. You know, if they're having vaginoplasty, they've got to dilate, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. Otherwise, you know, it closes up and there's no, you know, genitourinary function possible, plus all the complications of that. And, you know, we're just a society of double standards, because we're horrified at female genital mutilation, and that's been banned in Australia. It's a crime to perform female genital mutilation on young children. And yet, you know, we've got these young people who've got all sorts of mental health issues, plus immaturity, because they're still at the very early stage of the lifespan, you know, being consented for the most radical of surgeries.
Absolutely. There was a case, I think it was in Queensland, where this man was performing backyard orchiectomies, and he faced prison time for doing that, like part of some eunuch community. And so that's illegal, but it's okay if the doctors do it, you know?
Was he a doctor?
No, he's just some backyard, yeah.
Oh.
So how did you become aware that this was a growing problem that was quite serious? Did you see it come up in your practice, or were you just following along with the media? What happened?
Well, actually, it was interesting how it happened. I have a very good colleague who is a psychiatrist, and he mainly practices with adult patients. And he started to see a number of people coming through with gender dysphoria. And, you know, many of them were adolescents, and often at the young end of it, you know, 13, 14, 15. And he emailed me and he said, you know, I seem to be getting, you know, this stream of new patients, and they're all presenting, you know, in a similar way, but I tend not to work with children and adolescents, and I'm uncomfortable, you know, accepting these patients. Are you interested? And I talked to him about the presentation. I said, well, in my 35 years of clinical practice, I've had exactly 0 referrals, you know, for this kind of thing. So I can't pretend to be an expert. You know, I'm going to have to read up on this and, you know, study it and see what I think and see if I can help them. So I said, leave it with me and I'll do some research and I'll let you know. And so then I started really looking seriously into the academic literature, but also online, to see what was happening online. And of course, it didn't take me very long to realise that what we had on our hands was a psychic epidemic, social contagion of these vulnerable adolescents. And this whole, you know, gender ideology movement had the strong flavour of a cult. And it met, you know, the definitions of cultish behaviour with these very strong influences, guru type figures, and, you know, I've had my breast cut off, you can too, and, you know, life will be great, and all this kind of thing. And so I kind of got so horrified at the whole thing that I accepted some referrals. And now half of my practice is, you know, families with young people presenting in this way. You know, I've really developed and fine-tuned an exploratory psychotherapeutic approach with these young children, and I'm getting a lot of desistance now, you know, and that persuades me that these children have been under, you know, influence, you know, from online. The schools are reprehensible in teaching phony science to these children. They're gender unicorn, they're introducing it in kindergarten, you know. Oh, you know, you can be anything you want. Doesn't matter the sex assigned at birth, you know, to say nothing of the fact that sex is determined at the point of, you know, fertilisation. Wrong science, wrong biology. Sex has taken a back seat. Gender is, you know, now has replaced sex as, you know, the immutable construct. And it's also wrong. And the most wrong thing about it is that all of the institutions that are supposed to keep our children safe have jumped on board. And that has convinced me that we're in, you know, the grips of a psychic epidemic that's being enhanced and embellished by people like the Human Rights Commission, ACON, the Australian and American psychological societies, a lot of psychological societies, psychiatric societies, the legal profession, you know, the laws being changed, ridiculous laws being legislated, and above all, the education departments. They're doing the most damage because children believe what their teachers tell them. And often I've had cases where children have been transitioned at school without the consultation or knowledge of their parents. And the first they hear of the fact that their child has been socially transitioned at school is they get a report card in the child's preferred name and pronouns. And the parents think they've sent home the wrong report. This isn't our child. They've just got the same surname, you know. And then they ring up and say, what's going on? And they said it was your child's wish, and the education department has passed a bulletin called Bulletin 55 that says that the principal can be in loco parentis if it's considered to be in the child's best interest.
As the parent, just for anyone who doesn't know, loco parentis.
Yes, that's right. Can take the place of decision making from the parents. But, you know, in this country, the parents have to give consent for any surgical procedure to any child under 18. And yet other authorities are now taking that role and responsibility away from parents if parents express concern, legitimate concern that their child may be doing irreparable harm to themselves without proper understanding of what they're embarking on.
Well, what advice would you give to parents that are going through this with their child? What have you seen that's worked in helping children get through it and desist?
Well, first of all, one big word, don't. Don't take them to a gender clinic. Don't take them to any gender affirming GP, paediatrician, psychologist, counsellor. Don't let them remain under the influence of people who sadly don't appear to have sufficient intelligence to realise that gender ideology is a phony, fake, flawed, non-scientific ideology that has no basis in fact or reality. And that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice I would give is to seek a legitimate therapist who has years of experience and qualifications in working psychotherapeutically with young people and families. I work very intensively with the parents. I don't just work with the child, because there's often something that's happening in the family dynamics that's making that child vulnerable to the message.
Yeah.
And it's a very complex set of predisposing and precipitating factors that have to be considered about, well, look, you know, there might be 1,000 children in one school and 20 of them will decide that they're transgender. And they're all being fed the nonsense, you know, in their PD, PHE classes, you know, about you can be whatever gender you like and gender's fluid and sex isn't binary and all that. They're all being told that, but only, say, 20 out of 1,000 are succumbing. And we have to understand why that 20. And that's what serious clinicians are doing, is understanding what are the vulnerabilities in the children who are going to drink the Kool-Aid, you know. And once you understand that and then you work with it to just shift the dynamics. I'll just give you just one example, and this has come up several times in my practice. Families with 2 children, a boy and a girl, and in those families, the father is very close to the boy, to the son, usually, you know, motivated by common interests. They both love sport, or they both love surfing or camping or something. And so the father forms a very close bond with the son and sort of neglects the daughter in a benign way. Like he mightn't realise it, you know, that this is the dynamic, but he tends to leave the daughter to the mother, you know, and they'll go shopping and do, you know, so-called, you know, mother-daughter activities, and he goes off with his son. And the girls then feel that their fathers don't love them anymore, don't value them, don't think that they're worthwhile. And when you're 12 or 13, your logic is not very well developed. And so it goes like this. Dad really loves my brother. My brother is a boy. If I were a boy, maybe Dad would love me too and spend time with me. And that's, you know, that dynamic in conjunction with everything that's going on around them, Pride Week every 5 minutes and phony teaching in schools and influences on the internet and friends that they know who are so-called transitioning, you know, all of these other things. So if you put that together, it adds up to a child who thinks, yeah, I must be a boy, you know, it all makes sense now. And my goal is for my dad to love me. See, but this isn't thought about in a proper way. And that's only one dynamic that I've identified. And as soon as I identified, I meet with the parents and talk to them about what's happening. And most parents, of course, want to help their children, want to understand what's going on. And as soon as dad starts to find some common ground with his daughter and spend time with her in the way that he's been spending time with his son, the girl can just let go of the belief that she's male or that she wants to transition. And also, you know, other things improve, like her, you know, often these children are depressed and they feel isolated in their families and so forth. And so we can get desistance with, 6 to 8 months of therapy. But the gender clinics don't think in those systemic kinds of ways. They're just very linear in their thinking. If the child says they're transgender, we have to believe them. We don't have to explore it. We don't have to, take a complex approach to what's going on. If the child says so, then that must be it. Get the parents out of the way. They're the problem if they don't agree. And so the child becomes polarised from the parents. And so a very unhealthy dynamic is set up between the child and the gender clinic and the parents. And so the clinics are actually undermining, the family structure. And we have seen quite often that young people are becoming alienated from their families. I mean, I've had dreadfully sad cases where 15-year-olds have rung the police without their parents knowing, told the police that they didn't feel safe in their own homes because their parents weren't supporting their gender transition, and completely unbeknown to the parents, the police turn up and remove the child to a place of safety, and these parents don't even know where their child is.
Wow.
And now the child is completely alienated from their family. And as far as they know, this child has started on cross-sex hormones.
Wow. That's horrifying, like such state overreach.
Absolutely.
And I've heard stories like this have occurred after children have accessed the youth public mental health service.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Things like CAMS and Headspace are all into the affirmation, and they should have been included on my list, when I was talking about social contagion. So, that's another thing I say to parents. Do not take your child to Headspace or CAMS if they've got gender dysphoria, because it will make the situation worse.
And their staff are underqualified to diagnose gender dysphoria as well. They're usually not qualified psychiatrists or psychologists. So them even attempting to diagnose such a complex issue is malpractice. It's terrible.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And thank you for reminding me about that. Because I have seen children who've come through the CAMS and through the Headspace, and the parents were advised to take them there, for treatment. And they end up being polarised. The child is being told your parents are wrong and you're right. You have to stand up for yourself. And, and this is where a lot of the self-harm comes in and the acting out. And, This is going... Sorry. Go ahead.
My family's part of the autism community, and the autism community too is rife with affirming children's identities, which is quite horrifying, actually. And we all know that autistic children are overrepresented in those identifying as transgender and then going on to, transition. So, that is a very, very vulnerable group. And I do have a number of young people with that diagnosis in my practice, but I would like to say that the diagnosis is being grossly overused. Yes,
currently. Grossly overused. And so that's another big problem we have, that all these children are coming in, and the first thing I hear is that they've got ADHD and or autism spectrum disorder. When you look at the frequencies of these things, it's what is happening in this age, that every child who walks into a clinician's rooms has ASD or ADHD.
I blame the public mental health service, whose funding is dependent on those diagnoses. That's who I blame.
And NDIS as well.
Yes.
To get the support for young people, they need a label. But the sad thing is the children take on the mantle you know, of that label. You know, I've got a 16-year-old who somehow acquired a label of ASD when in fact she had PTSD from serious early abuse. And she used to, you know, act ridiculously, very histrionically in my rooms, you know, flapping and fidgeting and stamping of feet and all this kind of thing. And I asked her parents about it and, you know, whether she was doing that at home. And the parents, fortunately, you know, were teachers, and one of them was a special ed teacher. So he was very au fait. And he said that, you know, she was doing similar things at home, but they'd started to ignore it rather than to express concern about it. And she stopped doing it, you know, but she was performing autism, if you know what I mean. She was, you know, she'd read it all up on the internet and what the symptoms were, and they all come in with their sensory processing disorder and, you know, and it's all performative, you know. You've got to get underneath and say, well, what's making it necessary for these young people, you know, to behave in this way? Because it really alienates their peers as well. Yes. You know, they can tell what's real and what's phony, and they really shun young people who behave in that histrionic kind of way, and that magnifies the problem, you know. So there are all sorts of complexities that we have now in dealing with mental health in young people and families. It's very complex. And there are a lot of, unfortunately, poorly trained or poorly experienced people out there with the best will.
And the you know, the gender identity's influence on the autism community, that is 5 episodes.
Right, yeah. Uh-huh.
And then the child that I know who had her breast removed shortly after her 15th birthday is both autistic and a lesbian.
Oh.
Yes. So we'll see how that pans out for her. So.
Oh, that's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, here in Victoria. Yeah.
Right.
We've just hit midday. Are you able to stay with us another 5 minutes or so? Or are you not?
Yeah, no, I'm okay.
Okay. I did want to ask you, are there any situations where you think puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for under 18s are appropriate? Or do you think it just needs to go completely? What do you think?
I think if we take the best information that we have from scientific research, when we've got a young person in front of us telling us that they're gender dysphoric and want puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones or gender reassignment surgery, I immediately think of those figures. 1 in 10,000 males and 1 in 27,000 females. Mm-hmm. So how is it that half my practice at the moment is gender dysphoria? Yeah. So I always have those figures in mind because there's a lot of very bad research out there now saying that 1 to 2% of young people are transgender. Mm. So how can it suddenly go from 0.001 or 3 to 1 to 2%? Mm. So if you wanted to do the least harm, my answer to that would be it should be totally banned for under 18s. Mm. Totally banned. Because if you just look on the web now, there are all of these sites popping up for detransitioners who've destroyed their lives. Now, on just one of those sites, a subreddit site, there are now about 47,000 young people who are distraught They've had their breasts cut off, they've had their ovaries and their uterus removed, or, you know, they've gone down the track of cross-sex hormones so far that they'll never have a female voice, or the young men who now have breasts, and in order for them to go away, you don't just stop the hormones, you have to have them surgically removed. So these young people are now patients for life.
Yeah.
You know, they've increased their risks in all sorts of ways. We know about what puberty blockers does to bone density. You know, the case of Leo, it's in the public domain.
Yeah.
A young person who now walks with a walking stick, and you
That's
know,
Swedish one, yeah.
Yeah. And the serious complications and the long-term impacts are now starting to be more fully realised, but it's still pushed under the rug in terms of the complications of these interventions, which are totally contrary to the natural order of things. And that is, you cannot change your sex no matter what you do. You can brutalise and mutilate your body, and you can perform masculinity and you can perform femininity, but you cannot become male and you cannot become female. They are the facts of the matter. And nothing that's happened in the last 20 years about all the change in ideology has changed those facts. And why people continue to cling to unreality is really a psychotic process. It's madness. You know, I mean, psychosis is defined as being completely out of touch with reality. And this is what the trans lobby and gender ideology is. It's a psychotic process, and we have to recognise it as such, and we have to be responsible adults and say enough. We've destroyed enough of our young people to have learned that it is not the way to go. But we're a long way off.
I think one more question, if you don't mind, before you go. We're seeing parents now raising their children as they thems. So what you're a developmental child psychologist. What happens to a child's psyche and sense of self and self-perception when they're raised with they them pronouns? Do you think?
I think they will be gender confused. Because the majority of children around them who have more reality-focused, sensible parents will say that, you know, you're a boy or you're a girl, you're my daughter, you're my son. And, you know, these gender-neutral parents are I think they're just going to end up confusing their children. I've written a paper on gender development in young children, and I would commend it to those parents who are pretending that their child is not of one sex or another, A, and B, that their child can actually choose when they're a bit older. Now, we know that children are not competent to give consent to a tonsillectomy. How can they give consent to the choice of a sex when they already have one, and all around them in their peer group, the evidence suggests that you are either male or female. There is no such entity as non-binary. And the young people, like the adolescents who are saying they're non-binary, are confused. You know, and these are young people who may be struggling with sexual orientation. There's this awakening, this slow realisation that they may be gay. And some of these young people are traumatized by that.
Yep.
Because, you know, all the gains made by the gay community are being lost because of what's happening in the trans community. And it's almost as if I saw a paper that said, where have all the lesbians gone? And sadly, some of them have gone into the trans community where they don't fit and where they're not going to be happy. But they think it's shameful now to be a lesbian. They have gone back into the closet, or they've adopted a false identity to make themselves more acceptable. And this is creating a huge problem for gay adolescents. You know, after all the gains that have been made and all the acceptances and same-sex marriage and the decriminalisation of homosexuality, it's been such a long road. And now the trans community is undermining that and appropriating the Pride March for themselves, you know. And even in England, in the most recent, I was in England at the time of the Pride March this year, and the police, there was a fracas between the gays and the trans, and the police actually removed the lesbians from the parade. And I just thought, wow, you know, it's got to that. And, you know, they were giving these very cogent, we're doing it for your own safety. We're not, you know, supporting one group over the other. But the trans were hurling abuse at the lesbian group. Why weren't they removed? Or why wasn't the march stopped? If you want to be absolutely fair, they weren't behaving appropriately. And there was a potential for violence to erupt. And we know that, you know, the public safety has to be protected. But they chose to remove the lesbians. And they, of course, the lesbians were distraught and say, it's our march. We have instituted Pride, not the trans lobby. But the trans lobby has very cleverly piggybacked on all of the gains made by the gay community and then discarded the gay community. And so they're doing lots of damage in lots of different ways to the autistic community, to the lesbian community, you know, to the general community, to children and adolescents. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that people are going along with this and can't see how homophobic it is and misogynistic. But look, thank you so much for joining us, Dianna. It's been an absolute pleasure. We might have to get you back at some time in the future to speak more on these issues. But thank you. I think what you've said here will be very helpful for any parents watching. So thank you. You're most welcome. Great. Okay. Take care. Nice to meet you, Angie.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
There we go. Okay.
These were good guests. What a wonderful guest.
Dianna has done a lot of work on this. She's actually got a book. I will link to her website in the description. She has a book which is a collection of papers that she's written on gender dysphoria. So it could be well worth a read for both, I presume, both for parents and for clinicians working in this area. Yeah,
I'd love to ask her about AGPs.
Yeah, I know. I went.
I was like, oh, yeah, because you know that they were in the DSM-5 as I think 4 or 5 as a paraphilia, and that was it.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, I'd like to. There's so many questions, but it's so like I remember years ago when the Australian Psychological Society came out in support of the affirmation model. I was absolutely mortified. And now they're backtracking a little bit, but it is so good to know that psychologists and psychiatrists with decades of experience are coming out and speaking plainly about this ideology. You know, no, but I defy any trans activist to listen to Dianna and counter what she's saying with any sense.
Yeah. I just watched a little bit of a Benjamin Boyce video. It's I know he gives me but it was a recent one, and someone sent it to me, and it was a mother had posted a photo of her daughter, her teenage daughter, wearing an adult human female t-shirt.
Oh, yes. I'm friends with the woman, the mother, Facebook friends with, Twitter friends with that mother. Yeah.
And it was part of the Young GC Women Unite hashtag movement on Twitter. And someone ended up calling the cops on her, and well, not cops, but sorry, child protection showed up at the door, like, we've had reports that your daughter's unsafe. Like, just outrageous behavior from trans activists, as you know, we've come to expect. But that's pretty cruel. So Benjamin Boyce interviewed the mother and the daughter, and the daughter was saying that you know, a part of this online transgender movement, that cult that sucks kids in, part of the like competition between trans teens is who has the most mental health problems.
Yeah.
Who has the most diagnoses. So when Dianna was talking about, you know, that patient that she was seeing that was like performing autism, that's what I was thinking of in the back of my mind. And then, you know, you've got the kids showing up saying that they've got multiple personality disorder. Like, that's a big one at the moment as well.
And the threatening to kill themselves.
Out of control. Yeah.
And it's funny that if you bring up any of these issues in, say, within the autism community, you get accused of ableism, you get accused of all sorts of heinous crimes. You can't question any of it. So the autism community is just as bad as the trans community for no platforming anyone who is trying to raise red flags.
Yeah.
It is just despicable.
Well, we better wrap it up there, Ange.
Yeah.
Final bits and bobs from you?
Oh, look, Mum, just my cat's still trying to jump up on my laptop like last week. So I'm like, get off. Just want to thank everyone who supported our protest and who is showing an interest in coming to our next one, because there will be a next one. So I'm really excited. We're going to try and have regular meetups, either to do some activism or social meetups, even, you know, once a month, hopefully. In and around Melbourne, not the same place every month, because, you know, we're trying to not attract dissenters, but we've already had some trans activists have said, we're going to counter your protest, but I don't think they will.
We'll see.
And even if they do, if there's enough of us, they're just going to look revolting. You know, who in their right mind would protest against women trying to get a male sex offender out of a prison, or trying to stop, you know, gay and lesbian kids having, you know, being sterilized and having unnecessary surgery? Like, who in their right mind would come out and say that was wrong?
Yep, absolutely. It's pretty bonkers.
Yeah.
We actually have a special edition of TERF coming out this Sunday, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, please like, share, subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you again next week.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stars. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.